All right, welcome back to the channel. Today is part 2 of our RBT practice exam series. In this series, I'm going through a full-length RBT exam. I'm going through each question and walking you through it, how I think about it as a BCBA, and how I think you should think about it on test day. So if you're enjoying these videos, please like and subscribe. Make sure you check out part 1, which came out last week. Check out our website if you need any study materials, okay? Check out one of these links, which I will put in the comments and the descriptions below. Any questions, let me know. I'm happy to help. Other than that, let's just get into it. So we're starting with question 11. A blank signals that reinforcement is available. So on the surface, this is a very easy question, okay? It's essentially a definition question, right? Identify the term that matches the definition, okay? And this is why I always stress that it's important that you know your terms and definitions and that you're fluent, okay, in the terminology. The test becomes so much easier when you're fluent in your terms and your definitions, okay, for two reasons. One, when you're answering long, complicated situation questions, okay, you're not spending time figuring out what the terms mean, okay, you're just answering the question. Two, if they give you a question like this, where they're essentially asking you identify the term, okay, you can answer this question very quickly, easy point, and move on, okay? So the two biggest things, right, are taking practice tests and then learning the terms and definitions, right? Know those terms, know those definitions. So when these questions come up, okay, you can answer them quickly, you can get an easy point, and you can move on, okay? So what's the answer? A blank signals that reinforcement is available. Is it an S delta, an SD, an MO, or an SP? Well, an S delta does the opposite. An S delta signals that reinforcement is not available. It's telling you no reinforcement is here, okay? It's letting you know that ahead of time. So it's not an S delta. An MO, okay, alters the value of a reinforcer. It makes you want something or not want something, right? But it doesn't signal that it's available. Remember what we talked about, okay, about MOs, right? It might make you want something, but just because you want something does not mean it's necessarily what? Available, okay? And then an SP, right, signals that punishment's available, right? So the answer here is SD, your discriminative stimuli, right? Our three-term contingency, SD, behavior, consequence, okay? When the SD is delivered, there's an SD, right? It's telling you or the learner, hey, reinforcement is available in this condition. All right, question 12. You were upstairs killing time while you cook your frozen pizza in the oven. 18 minutes later, you hear the oven go off. It takes you 10 seconds to start walking to the oven. The 10 seconds represents what? Okay, so tricky question here, right? There's kind of a lot going on, a lot of behaviors, a lot of times, right? So remember, figure out what the question is asking. What is the question asking about? The question is asking about the 10 seconds, okay? It's asking you about the 10 seconds it takes you to walk to the oven, right? So what does that represent, okay? Does that represent a duration, an IRT, a latency, or a rate, okay? So the question is, it takes you 10 seconds to start walking to the oven after the oven goes off. Well, what do we know about the time in between an SD, an instruction, a signal, and the start of a behavior? What is that called? Okay, is that duration? Is that IRT? Is that latency? Or is that rate? Okay, well, we know it's not rate, right? Because there's no frequency involved, there's no counting. Okay, it's not duration, right? Duration would be how long it took the pizza to cook. Okay, we're not, when we talk about the time in between a signal or an SD, okay, and the time it starts a behavior, we're not talking about duration, right? What are we talking about? Okay, is it IRT? No, IRT is the time in between two behaviors. Okay, so the answer here is latency. The time from the oven going off, which is the SD, okay, the time it takes you to start walking to the oven, okay, is 10 seconds, and that represents latency. This is a tricky question, okay, and again, why it's very important you know your terms and definitions, okay, because Unless you know what each one of these are, okay, this is going to be a very tough question to answer. Again, right? The 10 seconds, okay, between the oven going off, okay, and you start walking to the oven is an example of latency, the time between the SD and the start of a response. All right, question 13, okay, has to do with graphing, right? They've been known to ask what the names of the x coordinate and the y coordinates are, okay? The y coordinate or the y axis is an ordinate, and the x axis is an abscissa, okay? Abscissa, I'm sorry, right? So this is simply just knowing this, right? In case they ask it. So the question is, which of the following is an abscissa, okay? And the answer is the x-axis. Nobody uses these terms, right? We call it the x-axis or the y-axis. But for some reason, okay, the test makers feel like you should know the technical terms for y-axis and x-axis, okay? That's why this is included, okay? You just kind of want to memorize it more or less, right? Don't worry about the graphing questions too much, okay? They're not that complicated, right? They're simply knowing what the line graph is and knowing what the coordinates are, right? And then kind of looking at it and reading the data off of, okay? Question 13, kind of a weird one, right? But they've been known to put this question on the test, okay? What is x-axis, what is the y-axis? And that's why I included, okay? All right, moving on. Question 14. All of the following are appropriate for conducting a task analysis except what? Okay, so what's the question asking, right? The question is asking, how do you conduct a task analysis? Okay, so what's a task analysis? A task analysis is when we take a behavior, okay, and we break it down into steps. Okay, so you take a task, you analyze it, and you break it into steps to create a task chain. So what's the most appropriate way, okay, to break down that behavior into steps? Okay, is it observe a competent individual perform the task? Yes, right? If I wanted to uh, analyze making a sandwich, I would watch somebody who knows how to make a sandwich, okay, and that would be sufficient, okay, to create a task chain for making a sandwich, right? So A would be appropriate. B, observe someone that is of equal skill in relation to your client. Now, what's the problem here, right? You might argue that, well, I want an age appropriate task chain, which would be fair, okay? But think about it. If you're analyzing a chain or analyzing a task to teach your client, okay, you can assume that the skill is not up to par, right? We're teaching the skill. So why you wouldn't want to conduct a task analysis by watching someone of equal skill, because the assumption is that same person also needs to learn the task, right? So B is not a good answer, okay? What about C? Perform the task yourself. Yes, assuming you're a competent individual who can wash hands and make sandwiches and tie shoes and do chores and these common task chains that we teach, then sure, you can perform the task yourself. And as you're performing the task, you can record, all right, the steps you're doing, okay, in order to make a task analysis for your client. So C is acceptable. D, consult with experts or skilled persons performing the task. Of course, right? Who better than the experts, right? If I want to teach somebody to swing a baseball bat, conducting or consulting with an expert or somebody very skilled, okay, at swinging a baseball bat would be a great person to ask, hey, what is the best way, okay, to chain this behavior, right? How do you perform this task most efficiently, okay? So A, C, and D are all acceptable. B is not acceptable. Again, observing someone that is of equal skill in relation to your client is not acceptable because our client, right, does not have sufficient skills. So we want to create a task chain, okay, using our task analysis that is sufficient to teach the skill. Tricky question. Okay, you are starting a brand new client tomorrow. Your BCBA asks you to collect data on matching skills and imitation skills before intervention starts. What type of data are you collecting? So there's a dead giveaway in this question, okay, if you've been studying your terms and definitions. So what is the dead giveaway? Okay, you're collecting data before intervention starts. That is the dead giveaway for the answer here, Okay. Data before intervention starts is what? Baseline data. So this should be an easy question, but if you are familiar with terms and definitions, okay, and you haven't been practicing questions, this could give you a lot of trouble on the test, all right? Because continuous is a type of data, right? A type of measurement. You can take inaccurate data, right? And then DRO is just differential reinforcement. But the key here, right, is you're taking baseline data because it's before intervention starts. Your BCBA wants you to know or wants to learn, right, what your client can and can't do in terms of matching and imitation. So let's assume this client is 3 years old, okay, and we want to get an idea of their skill level, okay, before we start intervention. That way we know where to start. Because if you go in and you collect data and they can already match and they can already imitate, okay, well, then we want to choose different programs, right, to start with. And that's the purpose of baseline. Where are we starting, okay, before any intervention, any teaching? So data collected before intervention is called baseline data. All right, question 16. The goal of a stimulus preference assessment is what? So when we're doing a stimulus preference assessment, what are we trying to learn? Are we trying to determine what skills our client wants to work on, identify reinforcers, identify possible motivators, or determine treatment goals? Okay. So A, determine what skills your client wants to work on. We're looking at a stimulus preference assessment here, right? So we're looking at objects and items, right, and things in the environment that the client likes. We're not trying to determine any skills here, right? Additionally, okay, it's good to have your client involved, right? But are we going to let our client ultimately decide the skills? Not necessarily, right? Usually your BCBA and the parents, in conjunction with the client and you, okay, will work as a team to determine skills. But when we're talking about stimulus preference assessments, we're not talking about skills. B, identify reinforcers. No, this is a common mistake, okay, and I cover it over and over again because it's so common. When you're doing a stimulus preference assessment, you're not identifying reinforcers, okay? A stimulus preference assessment does not identify reinforcers. What does it identify? It identifies possible motivators or possible reinforcers, okay? When you do a stimulus preference assessment, all you're doing is saying, my client likes this, my client doesn't like this, my client likes this better than this, okay? We know what they like now, so we can possibly use them as reinforcers and motivators, okay? There's such a thing as a reinforcer assessment, and that's when you're actually looking at the reinforcement possibilities, right? Because remember, what makes a reinforcer? The behavior has to change, okay? So just because you run a stimulus preference assessment and your client likes something, okay, doesn't mean they're motivated by it. It doesn't mean it's going to change the behavior, all right? You might love chocolate cake, okay, but it doesn't mean it's going to motivate you. It doesn't mean it's going to change your behavior, all right? So a stimulus preference assessment is identifying possible motivators, possible reinforcers, what the client likes. And then D, determine treatment goals. No, treatment goals do not have to do with stimulus preference assessments, okay? So good question. Remember, when you're going through the questions and you find the right answer and you're sure of it, still read all the answer choices because you're looking for the best answer possible. All right, question 17. Consequences affect blank behavior. All right. Do consequences affect current behavior, current and future, future and past? Well, consequences can't affect current behavior, right? Because consequences come after the current behavior, okay? So the behavior is done once the consequence happens. So it can't be current, right? And then at B, it can't be current because obviously, right? C, future. Yes, consequences affect future behavior. Okay, that's the whole idea behind reinforcement, extinction, and punishment. When we reinforce, we're trying to increase future behavior. When we punish, we're trying to decrease future behavior. Okay, and when we put something on extinction, we're trying to extinguish future behavior. All right. So that three-term contingency, or SD, our behavior, our consequences, Our consequences influence future behavior. Okay. What about past? No, right? Behavior just happened in the past. You can't change. It's already happened. Okay. Past behavior influences how we treat other behavior, right? But we can't do anything about it. So consequences have no impact on past behavior. Consequences affect future behavior. All right. Tom has been learning how to swing a golf club in his backyard using plastic balls and a net. Tomorrow he is going to play a round of golf on a real course. If Tom is able to competently swing his clubs on the course, he would be doing what? Would he be shaping, generalizing, maintenance, or reinforcing? All right. So, what is shaping? Well, we know shaping, okay, is reinforcing approximations of behavior. All right. Tom might be doing that in his backyard, okay, working on the swing piece by piece, okay, and slowly building up into a full swing, okay. But he's trying to take that swing and take it onto the golf course, okay. So if anything, the shaping's already been done, so A is out. B, generalizing. So what is generalizing? Generalizing is performing a behavior or performing a response, okay, in an untrained or the non-learning environment. Okay. So what is Tom doing? Well, he's learning in his backyard. He's training in his backyard. Okay. Then he's going to a new environment, right? And trying to execute the same behavior. Okay. If he's able to, then he would what? He would be generalizing. Okay. Perfect fit, right? Backyard is the learning environment. He's trying to take that skill, take that behavior, take that response, okay, and go execute it in an untrained, unlearned environment. And as RBTs, okay, and as BCBAs, as ABA practitioners, that is our goal. We want that skill we teach, okay, to generalize across environments, across people, across time. All right. The behavior is not generalizing. If they're not able to do that behavior outside of a clinic or a learning environment or a home environment, okay, we need to do something about that, right? They must be able to perform that skill, okay, outside of the training environment. C, maintenance. Maintenance would be Tom plays golf once a week, okay? He already knows he can do the skill in the golf course. Now he's just playing once a week, okay, to maintain that skill, all right? So generalizing and maintenance kind of go hand in hand, right? You learn the behavior, okay? You kind of shape it up. Now you got a full behavior in the trained environment. Then you generalize it to another environment, okay? And then you perform that skill occasionally, right? To maintain, right, the skill, okay? And then reinforcing, no, because it might be super punishing to Tom to go play golf for real. Okay, we're not really sure, right? So the best answer here is generalizing, going from an untrained environment, okay, or I'm sorry, going from a trained environment to an untrained environment. All right, question 19. Which of the following is an example of a dual relationship? So what's a dual relationship? A dual relationship is when a professional and a personal relationship collide, okay? So as an RBT, as a behavior technician, you are a professional ABA provider, okay? All relationships with families should be kept professional. So the reason that becomes difficult is because if you are going into a client's home 3, 4, 5 times a week, you're working with the children, you're getting to know the siblings, okay, you're interacting with parents and grandparents and whoever else is involved day in and day out, okay, you start to develop a relationship with the family, obviously. They start to really trust you, they start to depend on you, okay? Just the natural course of the RBT family relationship, okay? However, you must still maintain a level of professional boundary, okay? So, which of the following is an example of not doing that, of engaging in a dual relationship where professional and personal have crossed? A, you attend your client's birthday party as a friend and not a technician. Yes, okay. You cannot attend birthday parties, you cannot babysit, you cannot attend graduations, you cannot attend any of these events, you cannot go golfing with the dad, you cannot go working out with the mom, okay? You cannot play bingo with the grandma, okay, as a friend, as a non-professional. All right. If you're on the clock, okay, and you're there managing behavior, okay, and you're working as a technician and parents are there, it's a different story. Okay. But if you're going strictly off the clock as a friend, it's just not allowed. Okay. You can't cross that line from professional provider into friend. Okay. It's unethical, right? It's not allowed. So A is an example of a dual relationship. What about B? Taking your client to a restaurant as part of an intervention with the approval of your CBI, of a CBI. Yes, right. This is fine. Okay. You are allowed to take your client out with approval, right, on CBIs, which are community-based interventions. Okay. There's nothing wrong with that. C, you work with the client in school and in home. Yes, this is allowed. Okay, you're allowed to work with the client across multiple settings. There's nothing wrong there. D, each session the parent spends an hour with you observing. Perfectly fine. Encouraged. Encourage the parent to watch, interact, engage. Okay. However, once you cross that line and now you start doing things as a friend, right? Babysitter, right? Now we're crossing the line between professional and personal. And when that line is crossed, you are engaged in a dual relationship, and it's just not allowed. Okay. And then finally, question 20, which of the following would be an inappropriate way to identify preferences for your client? Okay. So again, we're trying to identify preferences. What are things our client likes? Okay. What are possible motivators? Which of the following would be an inappropriate way to do that? Okay. Would it be ask the parent what the client likes? Find a top 10 list of things children like on the internet? Ask the client what they like, or observe the client in their natural environment? Well, D, of course, is perfectly fine, right? Observing the client is one of the best ways to figure out what they like, okay? Especially doing it naturally where they're just free to engage wherever they like, okay? It's a great way to figure out what they like, okay? What about C? Ask the client what they like. Of course, right? If your client's able to communicate with you and tell you what they like, then please ask them, okay? It's encouraged. What about B? Find a top 10 list of things children like on the internet. So what's the problem with B? Okay. That top 10 list is generalizing across all kids, right? They're saying the top 10 hottest items that children want are these. Does that necessarily mean our client has any interest in any of those items? No, right? Everything we do should be client specific. It should be on a client by client basis, okay? Picking a top 10 list, right? And then just saying, well, my client's going to like 3 of these, okay, is just incorrect. You can use the top 10 list to maybe guide you, okay, where you can bring items, okay, but using it to actually identify preferences for your client, okay, is just incorrect. They might not like a single thing on that list, okay. There are many kids that we work with who we have trouble identifying preferences because their preferences are unusual, right? They have unusual preferences, okay, or uncommon preferences, and their preferences would not exist on a top 10 list, okay? So using a general list and a general guide, okay, for client-specific things like preferences is just incorrect. What about A? Ask the parent what the client likes. Of course, right? The parent should know, right, what their kid likes, okay, or at least have an idea. Perfectly acceptable. You should still do preference assessments, right? But asking the parent, okay, what they like is perfectly fine. So the answer, what is inappropriate, is finding a top 10 list of things children like on the internet. All right, that wraps it up for today. Next week, we'll do 21 through 30. Keep studying hard, learn your terms and definitions, all right? If you need the study materials, they're available here, right? And then at my website. Any questions, please let me know. I'm happy to ask, okay? Other than that, new video coming Wednesday and Friday as well. Look out for those. Keep studying hard, and I will see you soon.